This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, which features garden writer, broadcaster and returning guest Kate Bradbury. Kate has a new book out, One Garden Against the World, in search of hope in a changing climate. It's been a while since we last spoke about Kate's garden, and with the opportune timing around the release of the book, I thought it would be the ideal time to catch up on what's changed for Kate, her garden and nature in general since 2019.
So yeah, it's almost sort of completely changed. I sort of took everything out. There was loads of non-native shrubs that had just gone completely out of control. There was a huge Japanese spindle that the previous owners had tried to curtail its growth by wrapping it in a plastic bag, wrapping the roots in a plastic bag. I just found plastic everywhere. There was loads of stuff. There was a eucalyptus tree that had been planted right outside the back door, which is never very good. So I sort of started taking stuff out and then just got a bit carried away and just got rid of the whole thing and just started again from this blank canvas. And now, nearly 6 years later, it's starting to look mature, which is really lovely. I dug a pond and I planted some native trees and shrubs, and I've got this tiny little hedge and like a big nectar border on the sunny side. I've got a sunny side and a shady side. So it's probably completely different to how you saw it, but not many people saw it in the state you did. So I'm quite excited by that.
And it's fair to say that you don't have acres of a garden.
Yes.
But when you first took it on, as you said, you took it back to nothing. And then did you have a plan in mind, or did it evolve over the years? And whichever way you did it, would you do it that way again?
Good question. I suppose the honest answer is both. I had a vague plan of what I wanted to do, but I'm not a very organised person. I'm a sort of do it and see what happens sort of a person, much to the irritation of everyone who knows me. And so, yeah, I had a vague plan. And so I stuck to that vague plan. And then when various things didn't work, I mean, this is what gardening is after all, isn't it? You know, when things don't work, you sort of adjust. So I started off by laying wildflower turf. So the lawn was a wildflower meadow, which worked really well when I was living on my own. And then when my partner and dog moved in, it just became completely untenable. So that's gone. The meadow's now moved to the front garden. And I'm just having a think about whether I want to keep it there because it just looks really bad in autumn. It looks lovely in June, but it's kind of the only month where it does look lovely. A couple of trees that I planted, I ended up moving to my allotment because I think I was a bit too excited about tree planting, and perhaps 3 large broadleaf trees is too much for a 40-foot garden. So there are various things. There's a big shed at the back that was put in by previous owners, and it's like the main focal point. I've got a real thing about sheds being at the back of the garden. So when you look out the window, all you can see is the shed. It drives me nuts, but I'm not going to move it. So I'm just going to try and grow things in front of it so it's not the focal point of the garden. So that's my latest project, is sort of trying to make the shed disappear, really, by growing things in front of it. We all know gardening's never done, is it? There's always stuff to do. There's always stuff to rethink. And that's part of the joy of it.
Yeah, it is. And it is a totally ongoing process. So you mentioned your dog Tosca, who features in the book a lot. And as a wildlife gardener, were you conflicted about the dog? Because dogs are fantastic. I've had them all my life. But sometimes when you have a smaller space, it's difficult to get everyone to live cheek by jowl. But was that an easy decision for you, though?
Yes and no. I mean, I was very apprehensive about getting a dog, because she's my first dog, so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But the wonderful thing about Tosca is that she's got absolutely no prey drive at all, which just surprises everybody. She'll chase a squirrel about 2 meters and then she just gets bored. She's very territorial, so I know that affects wildlife in lots of ways. If you're big enough to be invading her territory, she'll chase you out of the garden. So she doesn't like the foxes. She doesn't like crows and the magpies so much. She doesn't like the squirrels, but she really doesn't care about the small birds. And actually, over the years, I've been sort of watching how she manages the space, because it is very much her space, even though I think it's my space. And her presence is actually beneficial to the smaller birds, because obviously the crows and the magpies and the squirrels, and to a degree the foxes as well, all predate songbirds. And so with Tosca there, just chasing everything out that is a threat to the songbirds. We've had really successful nesting attempts. In where I live, there's so many cats. Oh, she chases cats, obviously, absolutely hates cats. So where I live, there's so many cats that when I moved in, lots of people told me, oh, we've had robins attempting to nest, but the cats got them. We've had blackbirds attempting to nest, but the squirrels got them. The foxes took the goldfinches. Whatever. All of these things, magpies, crows, and actually Tosca's presence means that these birds are actually fledging. So last year I had a family of 5 baby robins, and all 5 fledged. And this year, 2 great tit nests. They had 2 broods and 2 broods of sparrows as well. So actually, while I was really anxious about her being there, she seems to be having a quite good effect, certainly on the bird life. I think she and the hedgehogs tolerate each other. And then, yeah, I'm sure she does disturb lots of other things, but generally speaking, she's good for the garden and she's good for us.
Like you say, you've got all the things in the neighbourhood kind of coming into play, and it's all got to find a balance. When you established your garden, I think the nice thing about it is that you did take into consideration the wider context that it sits within. How can people ensure that they are making sure their garden is part of the bigger environment, part of the bigger picture?
I mean, I think the first step to that is actually just seeing your garden as part of the wider landscape. So not just looking at your garden as being within 2 fences, 3 fences, whatever, or walls, or, whatever boundaries you have, and actually thinking, okay, this is part of the wider landscape. This garden connects, for example, to the local park, which is, a couple of streets away. This also connects to the beach, or, I mean, I'm just thinking about where I live, the Downs. There's wildlife that uses my garden that also uses the South Downs National Park, and certainly my local park as well, and then other local parks. And so seeing how your garden sort of responds to that and is part of that is the first step. And then just really practical things like just providing access. So a hole in the fence, at the bottom of the fence, or at the bottom of your wall will just enable hedgehogs, frogs, toads, slow worms, etc., to enter and exit your garden easily. And so they're traveling between the spaces. And then certain plants you grow will attract certain types of birds. So, for example, because I live very near the coast, every autumn and every spring, I get migrating birds coming into my garden. They don't nest because they tend to nest in the countryside. They tend to nest in much more rural areas, but they use my garden as a stepping stone. And so chiffchaffs, for example, they stop in. I'm waiting to see my first chiffchaff of autumn, actually. And they eat aphids. So just little things like leaving aphids on your plants you can get some really exciting birds coming in, which is sort of stepping from your garden into somewhere more rural, which makes your garden part of that rural landscape.
Well, I don't like to brag, and I hope you're not too jealous, but I've had 2 chiffchaffs this morning that I saw out the window. Yeah, but I don't know if they were a male and a female because I don't know enough about chiffchaffs. And sometimes I think that you could look at them and mistake them for a wren because they're actually more tinier than I imagined. But yeah, so that was very cool. You mentioned before your hedgehogs. I don't think you had hedgehogs in your garden when I came to see you, but can you just tell me a little bit about how you got into your hedgehog saving?
My love of hedgehogs has just grown exponentially over the last few years. I basically moved here for hedgehogs. So, when you're buying a house or you're renting a house or something and you've got a list of questions to ask the landlord or the previous owners. And one of my questions was, do you have hedgehogs? And the woman answered, I've seen one once in 8 years. And I was like, that's enough for me. And so yes, and then I put a camera out. It took me a while, moved in January and put a camera out in March. And yeah, the first night I put it out, I got a hedgehog. And so since then, that's grown and I feed them. I've got nest boxes for them. I've created a big open habitat pile at the side of my shed, which they absolutely love. They go in there all the time. All of our houses are sort of Victorian terraced houses, and they're all connected by an old coal route, like a ginnel, or what do we call it down here? A twitten. And so that connects to the park as well. So they've got this big sort of route, this big access both to our gardens and to the local park. And so, yeah, I've set up a little hedgehog group with all sort of neighbours, sort of like-minded neighbours. And so there's a few of us now, and we all keep an eye out for the hedgehogs. We all feed the hedgehogs. And I've actually recently, very recently, taken a hedgehog first aid course. So I'm now a qualified hedgehog first aider. So I can help hedgehogs, assist them when they need it, which is great.
That is brilliant. Well done. I mean, you are so lucky to have them as well. because then they are just so rare now and it's very sad. But well done. I love your hedgehog work. You mentioned about getting people involved and your neighbours, and you are so good at that. I think you're an example to us all in how you try and communicate with the wider community and bring them into what you're doing. I think it's hard because sometimes, like, you give examples in the book of where it's not worked out quite so well. But when it does work, you must get a real sense of achievement from spreading the message and getting other people on board.
It's wonderful. And I will say that I'm a really shy person and I really struggle. So if anyone's out there thinking, oh, I'd love to get in touch with my neighbours, but I can't, I'm too shy, it is often the most painful thing. And I don't always do it. But if I'm in a particularly good mood or I'm feeling confident or whatever, then I'll do it. I've got a thing at the moment where there's a road near my allotment and there's loads of nesting swifts in all the houses. But every year people block up the holes. And I think they do it deliberately because they don't like the swifts nesting with them. They don't know what they are. And they do it accidentally as well because they haven't noticed the swifts nesting. So I've just been working out last few weeks how, if there's something I can do, if I can get in touch with them. I've already leafleted, but just dropping leaflets, it doesn't really work. And then doorstepping, it's like, oh, really? So I'm going to write notes for all the people who I've seen swifts nesting in them. But I've also decided today that I'm going to get in touch with the local Facebook group for that road because I found one and just say, hey, I'm a little bit obsessed with swifts. Can we talk about them? Can we set up a group? Does anyone care? And if I can get one person who lives on that road to actively start looking out for the swifts, then that's my aim, just to get one person, one ally. And that ally then might be a route into getting more things achieved and more swift nest holes saved, basically. But yeah, it does take a while to work out how you're going to do it. I think some people are really confident and they'll just go and doorstep and they'll write loads of letters and stuff like that. And I wish I was more like that. But yeah, I do what I can within the sort of confines of my own sort of confidence, really. But yes, I would say if anyone's listening and thinking, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't, like, just keep trying and keep seeing what you can do. And if there's a way you can work around it, because just getting one ally, one person to put up a swift box, one hedgehog hole, one hedgehog box, you can start to tip the sort of tide of feeling there. There are tipping points. And if you get enough people on board, then suddenly everybody wants to join in. And once you get to the point where everybody wants to join in, that's when amazing things start to happen. So yeah, keep plugging away at that.
I think that's a very important message, and I'm so pleased that you do overcome any of your fears and your shyness and everything to get the message out there. I was at a conference and I had to speak in front of a lot of people, and I said, honestly, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I really don't enjoy it. It doesn't come naturally. But when I was speaking to Arit Anderson, who was chairing the panel, she actually said something really interesting beforehand, which was sometimes the message is so important, you just have to get out of the way and just do the uncomfortable stuff to get it out there. Sometimes that kind of thing can be a little bit soul destroying, or it can knock your confidence. Your book's called One Garden Against the World. How do you feel like when you're one girl in one garden and you feel like you're literally against the world?
Yeah, it's quite soul destroying, but I keep going, and I keep going because, I was literally having a word with myself this morning as I was cycling to the gym and just thinking, if you don't step up for these swifts, if you don't get in touch with these people who live on that road where they're either deliberately or inadvertently blocking the swift holes, then you are going to have to deal with the fact that these swifts are going to have nowhere to go in spring, and you're probably going to see them not having anywhere to nest. And that's going to be heartbreaking because actually, when swifts have their nest holes blocked, they will die trying to get into the nest holes. They're extremely faithful to their nest holes. And, on my way to my allotment, in spring, if I have to see swifts trying to get into their nest holes and potentially injuring themselves, not being able to, and I think, well, hang on a minute, I could have done something there, but I didn't. How's that going to make me feel? And that's what spurs me on, really. And so, yes, sometimes I do just feel absolute despair, when my neighbour's got his leaf blower on or, whatever. So, someone's chopping a tree down, all of these other things that, we have to deal with when we live in urban areas with tiny gardens. But there's always something to spur me on. And that's, hedgehogs being attacked by strimmers because people aren't thinking about checking long grass before they strim it, or, swifts having their nest holes filled in, or, bumblebee nests being destroyed, or any of the hundreds of things. So yeah, I just kind of dust myself off, take a few days, and then I'll just get back on it. Because the alternative, I mean, certainly the alternative in this case for me at the moment is potentially having to witness swifts not being able to access their nest holes, which is going to be devastating.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, I wonder, like, I feel when I read your writing, I feel that despair occasionally, but I think I also feel anger.
Mm.
I wonder, do you sometimes have to temper yourself when you're writing? Are there bits that you take out because you just think that's too angry, or I feel that's going to cloud the message? Do you ever feel like you have to do that?
Yes, absolutely. There was a lot that I took out of the book actually, because ultimately I wanted the book to be positive. I wanted people to feel uplifted. I wanted people to say, do you know what? I'm going to go and do something. I didn't want people to just be really miserable and feel helpless. I think that's really counterproductive. So, yes, there are sort of periods in the book where I do write about climate collapse and I do write about biodiversity loss and all the people sort of doing all these terrible things. But actually I try to sort of balance that with, positive things that we can do, positive things that other people are doing. One of my neighbours just randomly put a Swift box up the other day and made me cry. I didn't even ask her. I don't know if it was me that influenced her or she just really likes Swifts anyway. Any number of reasons why she's put up a Swift box, but it made me cry because it was so joyous to see. Yeah, those are the things that I try to focus on to sort of counter the bad things that are going on. And certainly this year, there's been an absolute terrible absence of bees that was really, really upsetting. And I spent a good couple of weeks just feeling really down about it and not really engaging with people on social media. People were asking me a lot, where are the bees? Have you noticed there's no bees? And I couldn't really answer them. I was really sort of just quite traumatized by it, really. And then just had a word with myself and just decided to focus on what was there. So I was focusing on my great tits having their second brood and, the species that, that were making it through. It was quite a good year for leafcutter bees and wool carder bees. I had wool carder bees nesting for the first time in 5 years this year. So, focusing on what is there and focusing on what we can do is the only way to sort of get through it really for me. And I like to sort of spread that message in my books as well.
I totally do get that. I sometimes wonder, is it a gender issue? Do we keep a lid on it? What would happen if we stood up and just went, ha? What would happen if we did that?
I'd like to see that. I think I'd just end up being arrested though, because I'll just be the only one, sort of going out on the road and screaming blue murder at everything.
I don't know if you would. I mean, other people might just go, yes, she's right.
I've always had this vision, and it'll probably end up being in one of my books one day, but of this vision of like a crazed woman. It's always a woman, isn't it? Sort of going out and just being so fed up with everything that she takes a pickaxe to the road and just plants a tree in the middle of the road. And sometimes I feel like that woman. Like so many roads could be pedestrianised and have some lovely trees growing on them. But yeah.
Well, I do always fear for society when I get properly old because I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, just watch this space. The other thing that I read, and you did actually touch on it in your book, why are you so viscerally connected to nature? It's like you feel everything that happens, every good and bad thing, like you feel it really deeply. And you mentioned that, for example, your sister is quite different. Have you got any inkling where that comes from?
I read something a few years ago that people who have that huge connection with nature, they were either encouraged from the very beginning. So as a baby, they were put under, when they were in the pram, they were put under an apple tree and just sort of like had their first moments just sort of, staring at birds in the trees above them or whatever. Or they experienced childhood trauma, which sort of drew them to the natural world because it was something beyond what they couldn't control in home. And I did have quite a difficult childhood. But again, so did my sister. So it's really unusual that I've sort of got this amazing connection with the natural world and she hasn't. So I don't really know what the answer is, but it's always been there for me. My mum always says, I always knew you'd end up working with the soil. I mean, literally sort of from day one, really, I was just sort of in the garden just sort of mucking around in the soil and making mud pies and things like that and looking at birds and worms and all of those things. Didn't really know what anything was never really encouraged, but did spend an awful lot of time in the garden. And so somehow, I don't know, I just fell in love with it. And It's a part of me in a way that it just isn't a part of my sister.
Yeah, you really do get that from your writing. What is really nice, actually, is that we haven't really been in contact since I last spoke to you, and we sort of serendipitously bumped into each other again recently.
Yeah.
And it's really nice for me to be able to step back and take a bit of a long view. Since we last spoke, this and this and this has happened. And I'll be very interested on your take on how you feel the landscape's evolved in terms of wildlife gardening, how much it's being spoken about. Do you think we've seen a bit of a shift in things for the positive?
Yes and no, really. I think the wildlife gardening movement has grown exponentially, which is brilliant. It's not a constant battle anymore. It's something that people are sort of on board with and willing to do, and that's all really positive and brilliant. At the same time, habitat loss has increased. We haven't stopped paving over things, particularly in gardens. The state of our front gardens as a nation now is absolutely diabolical. So many people are paving over their front gardens to park their cars, or because they just want it to be convenient, they don't want to do anything. I think there's a huge disconnect between gardeners and non-gardeners. So if you're a gardener, then you're more likely to be on board with wildlife gardening, and you want to help things and you want to do more for bees. But if you're not a gardener, you just want to just pave it over and have it easy so you don't have to deal with it. So yes and no. I would like there to be more gardeners, basically. I would like more people to get involved. And even if you're not interested in gardening, just accept and understand that the space outside your front and back door is home. It's home to loads of animals that really need that space. And if you pave it over, you're making those species homeless. And you don't have to do that.
And not to get too political, but how confident are you that things will change for the better? Now we have a shift in government as well.
Carbon-wise, feeling quite positive about the clean energy bill that's coming in. They're saying lots of good things about clean energy and not opening new oil fields and stuff like that. So very positive about that. But I still don't think there's enough about the natural world. There's enough about habitats. There's a lack of understanding about certain spaces that are needed. So this kind of like build narrative that seems to be peddled quite a lot at the moment, and building over green belt and brownfield sites worries me. So yeah, a mixed bag, I think. I'd really like them to push ahead with the clean energy, but I think I'm really glad we've got 4 Green MPs, and I hope that's enough to sway the government into thinking more about habitats and wild spaces. But there's still a lack of understanding amongst those in power as to the essential benefits of wild spaces.
Thank you very much to Kate for taking the time to speak to me. I hope you get a copy of the book so you can experience the magic of Kate's writing for yourself, or buy it for the person in your life who might just need a gentle nudge to cut their grass less often, or even put up a Swift box. And also thanks to Kate for speaking to me when I was a fledgling podcaster without any real track record in broadcasting. Hosting well-known and knowledgeable people like Kate at the start helped the podcast to be taken seriously within the industry. So I'll always be grateful to the earlier guests who entrusted me with sharing their work. Thank you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out, of course, episode 38 with Kate and episode 244, The Biodiversity Gardener. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.